I just recorded my super long March wrap up and now I need a cup of coffee. Hello BookTube. This is my review of Ninefox Gambit by Yoon Ha Lee. I was going to try to keep this succinct, but when I sat down to write the notes for this video, it took 2 pages. Usually my book review notes take 1 page. Basically, I have a lot of feelings about this book. And more than that, it's a really complex novel, and so I spent a really long time trying to put my ideas of what the novel was about into words that made sense, and that was tough, but I really liked this book and I'm really excited to talk about it. So I gave it 5 stars. It is a hard science fiction novel and the first in a series. The second book is coming out this June and I am super excited for it. I think it's probably my most anticipated release of 2017 now. Coffee. So soothing to my sore throat. Let's get in the notes. Just a disclaimer. I don't know what the correct pronunciation is of any of these words, and so I'm just gonna say them how I read them to myself in my head when I was reading the book, and I apologize it's not even like an if, it's more like a when. I apologize when I totally butcher everything. Okay, let's get started. Mathematical genius and infantry grunt captain Kel Cheris is tasked with reclaiming a pivotal fortress in the far-flung Hexarchet. To accomplish this task, she is anchored to the preserved consciousness of the Hexarchet's biggest traitor and greatest general, the supposedly mad general Shuos Jideo. In an empire ruled by a rigid system of calendrical obeisance, which allows for exotic technological effects beyond the realm of ordinary physics, absolute alignment to the regime pedagogy is imperative to the Hexarchet's continuing function. To ensure this obeisance, citizens are closely brainwashed with behavior modifications and instincts. Ninefox Gambit unfolds as a military campaign is launched against the calendrical heresy threatening the balance, while the protagonist works hand in hand with the betrayer Shuos Jideo. This raises questions such as, what is Jideo's madness? What is the source of the heresy in the Fortress of Scattered Needles? And what is Jideo trying to teach Cheris with his insistence on Shuos games? But I say that, I wrote that, and it makes sense, sort of, having read the book, but there's a lot of words in there that I think don't necessarily fit into a cohesive picture, because the world in this book is so total and complete and well thought out. But as the reader, we are shoved right into the action, right from the beginning. And stuff is explained, but sometimes the explanations don't make sense because they're explained in the context in which the book exists. Like the world, they're explained in the context of the book itself, not necessarily in the context of the reader. So sometimes stuff is presented as an explanation, but the thing being presented as the explanation doesn't necessarily make sense because it doesn't exist in our world either. If that makes sense. It's so good, but it's so immersive. Like, even if you're not necessarily following every single thing, it so sucks you in. Like, I couldn't stop reading this book. I think I sat down and read for like 5 solid hours to get through the end, and I kept repeatedly telling myself, okay, go to bed, go to bed, go to bed. But I wanted to know how it ended so badly. I'm gonna link a video, and you might have seen it. It was a viral video several years ago titled What English Sounds Like to Non-Native Speakers. It's really fascinating because it's like you're watching it and you feel as though you can almost understand what's being said, but you can't always, or you can't mostly understand the particular words. That's the point of the little video. About 25% of this book, 20 to 25% of this book felt like watching that video. It was like I was witnessing English, or I was witnessing a language that I almost understood but I couldn't quite contextualize it, but it really didn't bother me. I just felt sucked in. I'm gonna try to unpack a little bit more of the plot. So basically, this is a deeply dystopian novel that is psychologically insidious because at no real point does our protagonist look for ways to break her system. She lives in a dystopian, totalitarian oligarchy, which is the main point of view, and we are deeply with her at all points, for the most part. And at no point does she really try to break out of the regime. There's no chosen one destined to overthrow the system trope, because this book is literally occurring centuries after that would be psychologically possible. There's a certain amount of contrast because the general the consciousness that's been anchored to the protagonist's mind. He is from about, I want to say like 400 or 500 years into her past. And he lived at a time where the Hexerchet was structurally familiar to what it is now, but kind of, it was a psychologically different place. Like, and so you kind of get this contrast of what, very slightly, what was possible psychologically when he was alive and what's possible now. And they're different things because brainwashing, programming, and instinct creation within like yourself has come so far that rebellion is just not even something that you would think of, let alone necessarily be possible. So it's really interesting. It stretches the reader's perception of reality and typical science structures. You're dumped into an alien culture with only nominal explanations. That is, there are plenty of explanations, but trying to detangle them or interpret them in a literal sense is very difficult. So that's kind of what I was talking about before. Things I loved about this book. I loved the world. I love how engrossing it is. I loved the point of view that we were so deep inside someone's head, inside a dystopian world where it was pretty much psychologically impossible for her to recognize that the world shouldn't be like this. And then I also really loved the general's character, Judeo, the consciousness. He was really interesting because you were constantly in the book, because he's the biggest traitor of their empire and he's supposed to be mad, right? And so you're constantly second guessing every single thing he does and says to the protagonist. She's questioning it, you're questioning it as the observer, and you're just like, you want to know if he's mad, if that's just propaganda, because he did this horrific thing. You're just constantly questioning all the time, and he's such an interesting character. I loved the pace. This book was really action-packed, but not necessarily action-packed in a traditional sense. There is some boots on the ground fighting, but there's a lot of just like maneuvering of pieces. It's a little bit like watching a game of Risk in space. Because technology is this whole thing about like exotic forces, the effects and the deployment of those exotic weapons really plays around with the boundaries of like human perception and physics. It's just, I don't know, it's a deeply psychological novel, and I think it like drills into your head in certain ways, and it's just really interesting. And I think it turned out to be, because of the dystopian element that's not necessarily forefront prominent, but it becomes more apparent the further you get into the book. I think it's really relevant. It's just, it's a great book. It's not going to be for everyone though. I really try to think of examples of books that are similar, but it's just so unique. In general, if you like hard science fiction with a lot of action, and you don't mind, or you do enjoy kind of a military dystopian element, I think it's really great. If you do not like dystopians that usually involve the sexual subjugation of women, I think this book is great for you too, because that does not come up at all. There is a little bit of an implied rape culture, but it's not like The Handmaid's Tale. I can't read The Handmaid's Tale. It upsets me too much. I don't like that dystopian. It's just, it's literally too scary for me. This book didn't have those elements, so it was much easier for me to read, and I enjoyed it much more. I think if you like Ender's Game, this might be a really good book for you too, because Ender's Game has a similar kind of dystopian feel. It has the same chess kind of element, or the Risk in space elements, where someone playing a game of Risk with a bunch of military pieces. But you don't want to read Orson Scott Card because he's a raging dickbag, which, I mean, he can really, really write and he can craft a story, but I refuse to read any of his books. So if you are in that same kind of situation, I think this is a really great alternative, because this author, from what little research I did, is not a bag of dicks. This author is actually a trans man. So it's a great alternative to Orson Scott Card, in my opinion. And then another book, which, man, I really need to reread Frank Herbert, because I keep referencing him and his books, and but it's been so long. I don't have a critical understanding of the books. Like, I just have my childhood remembrances of the books and how much I liked them. But yeah, I really need a mental note, reread those books. But anyways, if you've ever read God Emperor of Dune. There was something about this book that kind of reminded me of that. I think it has to do with the systematic brainwashing and people programming that occurs under Leto Atreides' empire. Was very reminiscent to the brainwashing and people programming that occurs in this empire. And there are certain elements of Judeo's story that made me think of kind of Duncan Idaho's story in God Emperor. Yeah, I mean, just if you kind of like those sorts of dystopian military science fiction novels, I think you might really enjoy this. That took less time to get through than I thought. Hopefully that was in some way coherent and made sense. I really don't know if it did. This book is great. I highly recommend it if you are a science fiction fan. That's kind of the long and short of it. Let me know if you've read this book and what you thought of it down in the comments below. Let me know if this review has helped you at all or inspired you to read it. Yeah, I'll see you guys all in my next video. Bye.